Okay guys, hopefully this will work as far as a demo on how to remove the connective tissue. So I unwrapped the Mink very carefully so that the paper towels and everything would stay not torn. That way we can reuse the same paper towels to wrap them back up when we're done. So I unwrapped them really carefully. Thank you, by the way, for getting them out of the bags. That saves me a few minutes and I really appreciate it. So remember, we're doing forelimb and then we're going to do hind limb back here. I'm going to start with the forelimb, and basically we want to take all this connective tissue off. People have their own techniques. I usually like to pinch that connective tissue and then use the scissors to cut it sort of off of the muscle. And you may remember that like the fat is kind of pale, whereas the muscle right here is sort of a darker color. So hopefully you can discern, you know, what is fat and what is muscle fairly easy. So I'm just kind of snipping it away from the muscle. And you know, if you nick the muscle a little bit, that's not a big deal. Just sort of know that you went a little too deep and you need to cut more shallow. So if you get a good grip on the connective tissue with your forceps, then it should pull off fairly easy. Now, one little tip, and I'm not actually doing it right now, but I've got some paper towels over here. So when you're taking off the fat, a nice way to kind of save time is just put the fat that you've taken off, just put it right on the paper towel. And then we can ball it up and put it in the trash when we're done, and it'll save us a step. You know, if we don't put it on the pan, we don't have to move it a second time. So we're going to trim away a lot of this connective tissue, and all the Minks are different. You know, some of them are gonna have a lot of fat on their shoulders. This Mink is sort of medium in terms of how much fat it has. So as a rule, the hard places to clean up, where you're going to have the most connective tissue, are right at the top of the shoulder. So this would be the forearm, and then this is his elbow, and then this would be the upper arm. And so right at the top of that upper arm, there tends to be quite a bit of connective tissue. One thing that you can do to make it easier is on the back of his upper arm, you've got the dorso-epitrochlearis. And usually if you just pinch, that thing isolates. You'll feel it separate on its own. And so it's sort of a nice way to orient yourself and also make sure that you know where that muscle is, so that you don't accidentally clean that off too, because you want to keep it. All right, so I'll trim off this. And in the crook of his arm, there's quite a bit of fat, but we do need to clean that off fairly well, because remember, the brachialis is one of the muscles on their list, and they will need to have a clean crook of his arm to be able to isolate that. So try to clean off just that fat from where his forearm meets his upper arm. Now remember, you don't have to go all the way down the forearm. We don't look at any of the muscles in the forearm. We just want to get this little crook of the elbow cleaned up for him. And then we'll take this off. The other place that can be a little tricky is the muscles between, so you've got your temporalis up here and the masseter kind of on his head. And then after that, you've got your clitocervicalis. And that's that big sheet of muscle. It's kind of thin. That one's sort of a pain because it is so thin, it's easy to accidentally cut. Remember though, if you do cut it, it's not a big deal. You know, just don't keep at it. Once you see you're cutting muscle, don't keep doing it. Just kind of, you know, reorient yourself and start in a different place, and trim away all of this connective tissue. So I don't know if the camera's focusing on that, but see how I'm holding this connective tissue with my forceps, and then there's my muscle of the clitoris cervicalis. And so now I can just kind of snip it as I'm still putting tension on that connective tissue. Let's do this. Another thing that students will tend to do is they will go all the way up to the middle of his back, but we don't have to clean all the way that, you know, that high up. We're just kind of stopping, I don't know, about right there. So don't get all the way up to the top. We're not really going that far. You can stop, you know, about the time that it starts to slope down to the side, if that makes sense. And you're only doing one forearm and one forelimb and one hind limb. So you don't have to do both forelimbs. All right. So that's pretty good for, you know, getting us started. So I got this part cleaned off. I got the crook of his little elbow cleaned off and his shoulder, which wasn't too bad to begin with. And then on the front side, remember they have to know the digastric, pectoralis profundus, and pectoralis superficialis. Now this mink isn't so bad. There's some fat here, but we could just use this side, okay? And so generally what we're doing on the front is kind of isolating muscles that may or may not be exposed. So I've been using this to remove connective tissue, but notice there's not that much connective tissue over here. So if I want to isolate the stuff up here, I can take my probe and just sort of get under that pectoralis superficialis, because that's a really thin muscle too. So I can get my probe up under that. And then this fat here, now that I've loosened up this muscle and I know where it is, then I can cut away this little pocket of fat right here. On the digastric, this is kind of a tough one because the fascia is so thick. I'm trying to angle him so you can see. So same idea. We really only have to expose one. And you're doing the same thing, it's just that fascia is kind of tough. So I'm going to pinch it and then snip that outer layer of tissue. So now I can see the muscle, but it's not really, it's still got quite a bit of fascia on top of it. So I'm just trying to get that digastric so where, you know, so it's visible and it doesn't look like I just pinned a bunch of fascia under his chin. So on some of these scissors too, there we go, they have like little pointy ends, and if you can get that to pierce the fascia, it's helpful. It loosens it up a lot faster and makes it easier to separate it from the muscle underneath. So this isn't perfect, but you can hopefully see what I'm talking about. So here I expose the digastric, and here I have not. Now let's look at the hind limb. Let's scoot this over. Sorry about the noise. These pans are not quiet. So we usually start on the lateral side and tail. Okay, here's the leg I'll work on so you guys can see it. Kind of angle it. Same idea. We're going to grab and pinch and snip the fat away. I usually like to start up here between the tail and the leg. The trick over here though is that you've got the semitendinosus that has its origin up here, okay, and then it wraps around and inserts on the front of, or kind of the inside of the tibia. So if we start over here, we just have to be careful that we know where the semitendinosus is and we don't accidentally cut it, okay? So I usually tell people, if you're not sure, you could always start over here, okay? But I tend to start over on the tail side, the fat over there. So the other thing to be mindful of is where that fur is around his anus. That's where you've got anal glands, and obviously you don't want to snip those. That's not good. So we just have to be kind of careful in this area, but that's one reason why it's nice to do it first, so that you've got everything isolated. So now I'm grabbing the semitendinosus so I know where it is, and I'm just trimming the fat that's on like your side so that it's good and separated from the biceps femoris. And trim that up. So I'm just trimming off any of the fat from this piece of semitendinosus that I'm pinching right there. Okay. Then if I come up to the top, the next muscle over would be my big biceps femoris. So rather than really tackle that, I'm going to go over onto the sort of the more lateral side and do my pinch and snip for the connective tissue. And if you go to kind of that corner where his leg meets up, where the leg meets up with the torso. Now there's this big blob of fat, but see how easy I just pulled that up, so you could just cut that off. Okay, that's not a big deal. We're only cleaning this little area, okay? There's no need to go way up here. There's no need to go way forward, like where my finger is. Don't worry about any of that stuff. We're just focused on this part, okay, for isolating our gluteus medius. Get this out here. And our gluteus superficialis and our gluteus medius. So on this very front corner, I'll do my pinch and snip, pinch and snip. Got a little muscle, that's okay. Here we go. There's not much fat on this mink, which is always nice. So remember how we pinched the dorso-epitrochlearis on the forelimb? We can do a similar trick by pinching the outside of his thigh. And what that does is it finds the sartorius for us. So all I'm doing is just pinching, and you'll be able to feel that sartorius start to separate. And remember, the sartorius will start up here, but then it goes around to the medial side. But this is just a nice way to isolate it and make sure you know where it is. And then if I get my probe under there, okay, I can really start to isolate it and separate it from the connective tissue. So now we've got my sartorius, at least the top part of it. And then right after that is the elusive tensor fasciolata. Remember, it's super small, thin. So I've got the probe up under it right now. And for this one, rather than tearing the connective tissue, I usually like to snip it and separate it that way. Okay. Forceps so we can see. Now can trim off some of this fat so we can see its shape, more of its shape. Okay, so now what I'm pinching is the tensor fasciolata. Oh, sorry. It's the fact that the little box is over on the end. Okay, so tensor fasciolata, there's the sartorius, tensor fasciolata. Then on the other side, notice while I'm separating these muscles too, a lot of the connective tissue in the hind limb is between the muscles. And so I'm kind of, once I find a muscle like here, This is going to be my cauda femoralis, but I'm just pinching it and pulling on it so that I can get up under it and, and snip, okay? Now, the cauda femoralis is also fairly difficult to find, but the trick of it is to get up here between the tensor fasciolata and the biceps femoris, which I'm going to grab with my forceps, and look up under there, and you'll see something. So the biceps femoris goes from here down to here, but up under there, there's something else going a different direction, right? It's going down there. So that is our cauda femoralis. And if we start down here and isolate it from where we've been grabbing the biceps femoris, that allows us to kind of see where it is and then follow it all the way up to the midline. So now that's my cauda femoralis. I'm still pinching the biceps femoris. Right. There we go. Now I can really start to see that cauda femoralis. Now, between the cauda femoralis and the tensor fasciolata, I've got this little kind of squarish area of muscle. Take this fat off. That's going to be the gluteus superficialis right here. Okay, so you want to be able to see that. See that. Okay, hopefully you can see. So that area is looking pretty good, like it's ready to isolate. The biceps femoris, we got it looking good here, but I'm going to go in on this side too and separate it from that semitendinosus that I found at the very beginning, okay? So now what I should be able to do with my biceps femoris is go all the way under it. Okay. Now, on the medial side, this side is not so bad because there's not a whole lot of fat. Usually on most of the minks, this is not a terrible cleanup. You've got two really thin medial muscles. Let's say I'm gonna do this side. Okay, there's the anus where all that fat is. We just wanna separate the gracilis and the sartorius from any of that surrounding fat from that anal region. So, if it starts to shred real bad when you try to separate it, that's when the scissors come in handy. Because sometimes if you just try to like pick at it with the probe, it ends up shredding the muscle. So in that case, just snip it. Okay, and then I should be able to get all the way up under my gracilis. All the way up under my gracilis. And then remember up here, the sartorius, we found that at the beginning, right, on the very first part, okay, of our lateral side. So now we can follow it over. Now here I've messed up a little bit because I punched through too soon. So this is still sartorius here. So now I'm just gonna kind of isolate that. And by isolate, I mean just go up under it and wiggle the probe around so it's separated from everything underneath. So now I've got all my sartorius there, and then I've got my gracilis here. And then kind of this belly fat type of thing. You don't really have to do much except just scrape up under there to loosen up all the connective tissue. Right there, all right. So that is the cleaning part. I hope that was helpful. Obviously every mink is a little bit different, but just getting the connective tissue off will help so much. Once you've done that, and so like if I'm not here, the faculty aren't here, something to, I mean, if you want to ID all the muscles and isolate them, knock yourself out. But I know the other faculty are willing to help me with that too. So the main thing is just getting them all clean, all the minks clean. And then, this is so loud. There we go. Then you're going to take the mink and wrap them up in the super nice blankets that we were careful to not tear. when we were taking them out. So they're kind of like, it's almost like a diaper material. In this batch of Minks, when we buy them from different companies, they have like different things that they've wrapped them in. So here's my paper towel of fat. Kind of gross. Ball it up, it goes in the trash. And then the Mink stays on the pan. We're going to put it inside a bag. And then I'm gonna put some tape on the ones that have been cleaned. So let's do, I'll have to look and see what we've got, but let's do pink tape, because I think we have a lot of pink tape. So do pink tape on the bag, so we kind of know that this one's been cleaned off, but hasn't been isolated. Okay, we haven't isolated the muscles. We haven't done all the cuts, that sort of thing, but it is clean, so it's kind of the first stage, if that makes sense. All right, so let me know if you guys have questions. Dissecting tools need to be rinsed off, put back in the pans just like we did a few semesters ago.